Disclaimer: I do not own the rights of any of the videos, images, or sounds other than my own voice that will be portrayed in this video. Everything you will see is for documentary purposes only and is protected under the Fair Use Act of 1976. In its current state, the future of comic book movies is in question for a lot of people. The last year of films and TV shows have not been good for the fans or even the regular audience members. They don't seem to be able to catch the same great stakes they held when it all started. 2008's Iron Man set a tone for what would grow into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And for a long time, it was holding up as the best movies that were coming out. Now, 56 feature films, streaming series, and various specials later, there seems to be a decline in the quality based upon what was set up from the foundation. The initial years of the MCU was divided in 3 phases, titled the Infinity Saga. This was the time where the MCU dominated and where other production companies attempted to replicate their success. By the end of Phase 1, compiling 6 feature films, 5 leading up to one big crossover film, the MCU made its mark and their biggest competitor wanted to sneak in and get some of that success. 2013 saw the release of Man of Steel, starring Henry Cavill as Superman and directed by Zack Snyder. This would be the start of what is known as the Snyderverse, a different style of comic book filmmaking that received a lot of praise, but was also the victim of a lot of scrutiny. Everyone was used to what the MCU was giving and wanted more of that. At that time, Warner Bros. Was willing to take a chance to see if something different could also be successful. Where could you go wrong? It's Superman. Plus, Nolan's Batman trilogy was just finishing up, and the darker tone that worked for those movies was a good starting point for other films of a darker tone. This film is still wildly successful and praised to this day for Cavill's portrayal of the popular superhero, but the follow-up film was not received with the same praise. 2016's Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice has its following, but upon release was completely bombarded by bad reviews and hate from fans. No one saw the vision of what Snyder was looking for, and that's because he was trying to make good movies and sticking with what his vision was. He was not trying to compete with the likes of Marvel. He was making movies. He wasn't trying to win a race. In the Hollywood business, the studios that back your movies don't always care about vision. They care about profits. By the time the third film in Snyder's vision was in development, he had suffered a tragic loss in his family life and was forced to halt production for the Justice League film. However, Warner Bros. Took this as an opportunity, and instead of allowing him time to grieve and stalling production, which would have happened in just about every other scenario in filmmaking, they brought in someone else to finish the film. Zack Snyder would step down, and in his place came Joss Whedon. Best known as the creator of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series from the late 90s, Whedon at this point was hugely successful in the comic book movie world, writing and directing the first 2 Avengers films, which were tremendously well received by fans. Warner Bros. Brings him in, and in 2017 we get the Joss Whedon version of the Justice League. And it's worse than we all thought. There is so much about that film that is wrong and doesn't make any sense. The choices in character development are just off. And because we have 2 films before it of a completely different nature, there's a disconnect in the continuity. No one likes this version of the Justice League, especially those who loved Snyder's vision and wanted to see what it would be like if he was able to finish. And then, the campaign began. It was reported that Snyder was nearly finished with filming his original Justice League movie. When Whedon came in, he rewrote the whole thing and called for a tremendous amount of reshoots. With that being out in the open, it begged the question, what did they do with all of the work Snyder had already completed? Thus, Release the Snyder Cut was born. Almost immediately, social media flooded with the hashtags and call-outs for the Warner Bros. Executives to release the full version of what Snyder had made. At first, the WB denied it ever existed, but no one believed them. For 3 long years, fans petitioned and pushed hard to have this come to light, and eventually, they got what they all wanted. On March 18th, 2021, Justice League The Snyder Cut was released. Did it live up to expectations? The verdict is essentially mild. There's a lot of flaws in this cut, and it's not for everyone. The unfortunate thing, though, is the feelings towards the film are mostly somber, simply because it's not supposed to end this way. Snyder had a 5-film series planned: a start, 3 middles, and an end. This film is meant to be the exact midpoint of his vision, but as of November 2023, Snyder himself has stated his vision is pretty much dead and the story will not continue. But what few have realized is the precedent this entire ordeal has set in motion. At first, WB denied this version of the film ever existed. Then, years after waves of backlash, they gave in. Now, fans know if they push hard enough, they'll get what they want. Another crazy example of this is the original version of Sonic the Hedgehog from 2020. The CGI looked so bad in that initial trailer, it caught a high volume of hate from fans. The studio really only had one choice. It responded and changed the look to be more accurate with the game. Some might say that is a bit much, but after they made that call, the film went on to be wildly successful, with a sequel already out and a third one in production. So, fan backlash might not be something good for studios, but it's certainly good for fans. And to be frank, if Sonic the Hedgehog is a good example, then it's good for studios too. So far, no example I have found really shows a negative light on how listening to the fans leads to a negative outcome. There are, of course, examples of how doing so doesn't change how bad a film still is at its core. An example of that would be the unfortunate 2019 Cats film, based on the popular Broadway musical. Audiences said the CGI was terrible, on top of being a mediocre film. So, the studio polished up the CGI and released a better version. But Cats is still a bad movie at the end of it all. The Release the Snyder Cut campaign might be the longest running and biggest of all fan backlash there has been currently, but something else is coming over the horizon. Shortly after the campaign for the Snyder Cut proved to be successful, fans began backing the idea for another film that was given a horrible run for the DC film universe. As I said before, the MCU was dominating the majority of the decade from 2008 to 2019, which was the end of the initial Infinity Saga and its first 3 phases. During those initial to mid-years is where a lot of this derives from, as the WB was making choices for a different route with its characters to try and still compete with what Marvel was doing. From the DC comic book world, the villains are always unique and they stand out as some of the best out there. So much so, there are various teams of villains portrayed in different portions of the DC universe. One of those teams is the Suicide Squad, meant to be a team-up of imprisoned supervillains that are given the option to complete tasks for the government in order to lessen their sentences. Team-ups for the Suicide Squad have seen combinations of villains from all superhero storylines. The concept started during the World War II era in a series titled Star-Spangled War Stories. By 1959, the first iteration of the team as we know it today appeared in issue 25 of The Brave and the Bold. It was a team consisting of relatively unknown characters today, which were led by Rick Flag. Then, in 1987, the second issue of the Legends comic series premieres the next iteration of this team, consisting of Bronze Tiger, Deadshot, and once again led by Rick Flag. Over the course of almost 40 years, the Suicide Squad has been a prominent fixture in the DC universe, having villains on the team including Poison Ivy, Killer Frost, Solomon Grundy, Cheetah, Nightshade, Black Manta, just about every other villain you could name. At some point, they were put on the Suicide Squad for some mission that they needed expendable soldiers for. Now again, we're talking about villains, the antagonists, the bad guys. Surely a storyline about just the bad guys wouldn't be successful, would it? Well, people love heroes, but they also love the anti-hero. The difference is that although the hero and anti-hero are still fighting for some form of good intention, it's how they go about it that separates the ideology. The Crow is a great example of an anti-hero. Although some consider him just a hero, since he's seeking revenge for the death of him and his fiancée at the hands of some gang, however, his method of justice is murder, which is not something a hero is meant to do. Heroes save the day and bring justice to crime. Anti-heroes see their enemies vanquished by any means necessary. This makes us hate them when they fight heroes, but love them when they fight other bad guys. We have to root for someone, right? So, the WB tried their hands at the anti-hero route by putting into production what would be the Suicide Squad film from 2016. The unfortunate thing is, they meddled in the process so much that the movie we got did not live up to expectations. Now, with the likes of the Snyder Cut being a reality, the focus has drawn to this film and what is now known as the Ayer Cut. Beginning around 2020, when the release of the Snyder Cut was made a reality, the shouts for the Ayer Cut began. One major difference between these movements is the Ayer Cut would garner a lot more positivity, as it seemed the likelihood of it being released was way more possible than what fans thought initially about the Snyder Cut. As of the writing of this script and the release of this video, David Ayer has stated the Ayer Cut is coming and something would be revealed. What that something is, who knows, but for those that might not understand why this is happening, you might not fully know the troubles of how Suicide Squad tried to be something it's not. First off, they were rushed into production to meet its release date. Writer and director David Ayer had just 6 weeks to write the script. Hardly long enough time to write a cohesive movie, never mind a masterpiece. And then, during production, the negative reaction to Batman vs. Superman made Warner Brothers worried that Suicide Squad wouldn't work. So, according to several sources, they hired the company that was editing the trailers to redo the entire movie. This lighter Suicide Squad was shown to test audiences alongside the darker, more somber version of Ayer's vision. They didn't like either of them. So, Warner Brothers did some reshoots and put together a final movie somewhere in the middle ground. The short version is, this is why the movie is tonally all over the place. You can't mix two concepts for a story together and expect it to work, despite how similar they might be. You can't blame Warner Brothers though for trying to spin the tables around on Suicide Squad and replicate Marvel's success. But this was the wrong way to do it, and it proved nothing since the movie is not well received. You can see it in the marketing as the images and trailers started to shift away from that darker tone into this more fun, colorful perspective. But no matter what they tried, it just didn't work. Now, fans want to see the original version. The first cut Ayer wanted to show for his film. Sooner than later, studios have to know that certain things work in certain circumstances. People compare Suicide Squad to Guardians of the Galaxy, which it is safe to say that after that film's success, Warner Brothers saw that and said, do that, but with bad guys. And they didn't acknowledge that it wouldn't make sense, at least not for the vision Ayer wanted. This would be proven by how 5 years later, a sort of requel was released, The Suicide Squad, which is written and directed by James Gunn, the same guy who wrote and directed everything that's come out for the Guardians of the Galaxy. And this version is massively more successful, but it gets its fair share of negativity too. The success, however, comes from having a cohesive story, a beginning and middle and end that makes sense. The 2016 version had a story that felt muddled, and that's because the studio wanted a financially successful movie, not a good one. Now, this isn't to say the Ayer Cut is going to be better, as a lot feel that won't be the case, but it's still exciting to think about. It's intriguing to think about what is different about this version of the film than the one that was initially released. It's actually something to get excited about for comic book movies again. So much going on with the wobbling stories in the MCU and the shift in leadership over at the WB. This is interesting, and it's getting a lot of attention. We could go into the questionable portrayal of the iconic Joker character played by Jared Leto, but that is a completely different video topic that could take longer than I like to discuss. What I will add about that, though, is that it is a prime example of what Warner Brothers did to this film. After it was released, it also received a lot of backlash from Jared Leto. During many interviews, he actually went on record stating that they filmed so much more for this role, and the studio cut out nearly all of it for whatever the released version showed. Leto claims there was enough footage to make an entirely separate Joker movie, and that upset him because he was fully dedicated to the character despite the hate he received for it. Now, if there is that much filmed for this character originally for this film, where he isn't even the main character that it's focused on, what did they cut out of everyone else? What will Ayer's cut show us? How different will it be compared to the 2016 version? The Snyder Cut proved to be tonally more in line with the vision he had for his series of films. And if Ayer's cut is meant to be more in line tonally to those characters, because they're meant to exist together and they were making these two universes at the same time, there will certainly be room for some praise. But until the Ayer Cut is finally released, we only have speculation, which is enough to get anyone excited, because the unknown is truly where movies shine the brightest, no matter how dark the story may be, or how dark behind the scenes was when making it.
Now this looks like a job for me, so everybody just follow me, 'cause we need a little controversy, 'cause it feels so empty without me.
What?